The night air tasted of smoke and blood. Seraphine knelt on the ancient altar, her bare knees pressed against stone so cold it burned. The ceremonial grounds stretched out before her in a perfect circle, ringed by torches that cast dancing shadows across 500 faces.
By the circle's power, rise
500 souls who had gathered to witness an Alpha be crowned. 500 souls who would not meet her eyes. She was not supposed to be the center of attention.
My people,
tonight.
the shadows
she was
gather,
18
but we will
years
not
old,
boil.
an Omega
By
who
the
had spent
eternal
her
flame,
entire
rise
life
and
learning to
stir!
disappear, to take up no space, to exist in the margins where the strong ones would not notice her. The kitchen girl, the broken wolf, the mistake. But here she was, dragged from the shadows and thrown into the firelight. The drums had stopped, the chanting had ceased, and in the terrible silence that followed, Seraphine could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears like a countdown to something inevitable. Kale stood before her, 25 years old, all sharp edges and barely contained violence. The king's only son, the wolf who should have been crowned tonight. His golden brown hair caught the torchlight, and his eyes, those cold amber eyes, held nothing but contempt as he looked down at her kneeling form. In his right hand, he held the ceremonial blade. The Omega must bleed, Elder Torvin's voice rang out across the gathering, the old man's words heavy with the weight of tradition. Old blood to sanctify new power, weakness to purify strength. Seraphine's breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her wolf, that small, dim presence inside her that had never been quite right, stirred weakly in her chest. Afraid, so afraid. This was not how the ceremony was supposed to go. In the 5 rituals she had been forced to witness before, Omega blood had never been required. A drop from the Alpha's palm, perhaps. The sacrifice of a deer. But never this, never this. Kale's smile was a blade all its own. Do you have any last words, little Omega? His voice dripped with mockery. Or are you as voiceless as you are worthless? Seraphine wanted to spit at him, wanted to scream that he was a coward who needed an audience to feel powerful. But fear had locked her throat closed, and all she could do was stare up at him and wait for the pain she knew was coming. She had survived 18 years of this pack's cruelty. 18 years of being kicked when she fell, starved when she was slow, beaten when she dared to speak. What was one more wound? What was one more humiliation? Kale's hands shot out, gripping her hair and yanking her head back. The world tilted, the stars wheeled overhead, and Seraphine felt the cold kiss of steel against her throat. For the pack, Kale whispered, close enough that only she could hear. For my throne, for every moment you've existed when you should have died. The blade moved. Pain exploded across her neck, white-hot and blinding. Seraphine's scream caught in her ruined throat, emerging as nothing more than a wet gurgle. Blood poured out in a hot rush, soaking into her threadbare dress, splashing onto the altar stones beneath her knees. The world began to fade at the edges, darkness creeping in like a tide. But the altar stones, ancient things carved with symbols no living wolf could read, began to drink her blood with a hunger that felt almost alive. The crimson liquid disappeared into hairline cracks in the stone, cracks that had always been there but had never glowed before. Golden light traced those fractures now, spreading outward like lightning, frozen in rock, and the temperature of the air itself seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. Seraphine pressed her hand against her neck, trying to stop the bleeding, but the blood kept coming, kept flowing, kept feeding those hungry cracks in the altar. And something inside her, something that had been sleeping for longer than she had been alive, woke up. It started as warmth in her chest, small at first, like embers catching, but it grew, spread, became a fire that raced through her veins and set every nerve ending ablaze with sensation that was not quite pain and not quite power, but something terrifyingly in between. Her wolf, silent for so long, roared. The sound echoed inside her skull, so loud and so fierce that Seraphine gasped and nearly fell forward. Her wound stopped bleeding. The skin began to knit back together in seconds, flesh weaving itself closed with a speed that should have been impossible for an Omega whose healing had always been slow and incomplete. Strength poured into her muscles. Her bones grew denser. Her senses sharpened until she could hear every heartbeat in the clearing, smell the fear beginning to bloom in the crowd, taste the change in the air like ozone before a lightning strike. Kale stumbled backward, his smile finally fading. What? The shift tore through Seraphine's body like a storm making landfall. Bones broke and reformed, fur erupted from her skin, her jaw extended into a muzzle full of teeth designed for rending flesh. The transformation should have taken minutes, should have been agonizing, should have left her weak and disoriented. Instead, it took less than 3 heartbeats. And when it was done, the creature that stood in Seraphine's place was massive, twice the size of any wolf in the clearing, 3 times the size Seraphine's wolf form had ever been before. Silver fur that seemed to capture and hold the moonlight itself, making her coat shimmer like living mercury. Eyes that burned molten gold, bright enough to cast their own light. The crowd gasped. Several wolves stumbled backward. Even Kale looked shaken, his confidence cracking for the first time in his arrogant life. Seraphine's wolf threw back her head and howled. The sound was not merely loud. It was a command that vibrated in the bones of every wolf present, a frequency that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to the primal thing that lived in their chests. It rolled across the ceremonial ground like thunder, shook the trees, sent birds scattering from branches in panicked flight. And 5 miles away in the army encampment, where 1,000 warriors slept in preparation for tomorrow's drills, that howl hit like a physical blow. Warriors lurched awake, gasping. Their wolves, those fierce, proud creatures that defined their strength, went silent. Simply stopped, as if someone had reached into their chest and squeezed. Men and women who had fought in dozens of battles, who had never known a moment of weakness, collapsed to their knees. Some convulsed, others simply fell, their bodies no longer responding to their commands. Blood trickled from noses, from ears, from the corners of eyes gone wide with terror. 1,000 warriors, the pride of the kingdom, the undefeated army that had never lost a battle, all brought to their knees by a single howl from a wolf they did not know, in a ceremony they were not attending, from a power they did not understand. Back in the ceremonial circle, Seraphine's wolf stood trembling. She could feel them, every single one of them. Invisible threads connecting her to warriors she had never met, binding them to her in ways that made no sense. She could feel their pain, their fear. Their wolves struggling against something they could not fight. Horror crashed over her. What had she done? What was she? The Keeper bloodline. Elder Torvin's voice cut through the shocked silence, the old man's words shaking with something between awe and terror. By the ancient laws, it survived. The crowd erupted into chaos. Wolves shouted. Some shifted, preparing to fight or flee. Others stood frozen, unable to process what they were witnessing. The carefully orchestrated ceremony dissolved into panic, all pretense of order abandoned in the face of something that should not exist. Kael had fallen to one knee, his face pale with rage and humiliation. The blade he had used to cut Seraphine's throat lay forgotten on the ground, its edge still wet with her blood. "What are you?" he hissed. Seraphine wanted to answer, wanted to explain, but she was trapped in wolf form, her body refusing to shift back, and all she could do was stare at the crowd through eyes that saw too much and understood too little. A commotion at the edge of the clearing drew everyone's attention. A young messenger, a boy barely old enough to have earned his warrior marks, burst into the circle. His clothes were disheveled, his face slick with sweat, and his eyes were wide with the kind of panic that came from witnessing something impossible. He fell to his knees before Elder Torvin, gasping for breath. "The army!" he choked out, the words tumbling over themselves in his haste to deliver them. "Something's wrong with the army. They're falling. They can't stand. They can't shift. Their wolves won't respond." The messenger's gaze found Seraphine's massive wolf form, and what little color remained in his face drained away. "It started when we heard the howl, that sound from the ceremony. And now the strongest warriors are on the ground, bleeding, convulsing. Some of them," his voice broke, "some of them have stopped breathing." The silence that followed was absolute. Seraphine felt as if the ground had opened beneath her paws. She had done this. Somehow, in ways she could not begin to comprehend, her awakening had reached across 5 miles of forest and struck down every warrior sworn to protect this kingdom. She was not a hero. She was a catastrophe. Fear became a living thing in her chest, squeezing, suffocating. The threads connecting her to those distant warriors pulled taut, and she could feel them fighting against the invisible force that held them down. Could feel them dying. No. No, please, not this. Alpha Aldrich stepped into the circle. 53 years old, with hair that had gone from black to silver at the temples and eyes the pale blue of winter ice. He moved with the absolute confidence of a man who had ruled for 30 years and never once been questioned. His personal guard, 12 of the deadliest wolves in the kingdom, formed a protective semicircle around him. His gaze swept across the destroyed ceremony, taking in his injured son, the panicked crowd, and the massive silver wolf that stood at the center of it all. When his eyes finally landed on Seraphine, she felt the weight of his assessment like a physical thing. "Shift," Aldrich commanded. The word carried the force of an alpha's will behind it, a pressure that should have compelled immediate obedience. Seraphine had felt commands like this before, smaller, weaker versions from pack leaders who expected Omegas to bow and submit without question. But this command rolled off her like water from stone. Her wolf did not respond, did not feel the slightest urge to obey. The power that had awakened inside her was older than Aldrich's authority, deeper than pack hierarchy, and it recognized no master but itself. Aldrich's eyes widened just a fraction, the first crack in his composed expression. "Shift," he repeated, putting more power behind the words, channeling the full weight of his position as alpha of alphas. "Now," Seraphine's wolf growled, a low, rumbling sound that promised violence. But she chose to shift. Not because he commanded it, but because she decided to allow it. Because she needed to speak, needed to understand what was happening to her and to those distant warriors whose lives were slipping through her fingers like sand. The transformation back was easier this time. Her wolf retreated, and Seraphine's human form returned. She stood before them, naked, covered in blood both hers and not, and trembling with exhaustion she could barely contain. But she met Aldrich's gaze without flinching, without bowing, without showing any of the submission that Omegas were supposed to display in the presence of royalty. The clearing had gone silent again, everyone watching, everyone waiting. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was carefully neutral, cold, calculated. "What are you?" It was a real question, not an accusation. He genuinely wanted to know. Seraphine opened her mouth to answer, to tell him she did not know, that she was as surprised as anyone by what had just happened. But before she could speak, the ground beneath the altar began to crack. The sound was deafening, like the earth itself was splitting open. Everyone scrambled backward as the fractures spread outward from the altar in a spiderweb pattern that glowed with the same golden light that had appeared when Seraphine's blood first touched the stone. Elder Torvin fell to his knees, his hands raised in supplication or terror, or both. He began to chant in a language so old that no living wolf spoke it fluently anymore. Words that felt heavy with meaning, Seraphine could almost grasp but not quite understand. The light grew brighter, spilling out of the cracks and into the air around them. And in that light, Seraphine saw memories. Not her memories, someone else's. Images projected somehow by the altar itself, showing her things that had happened on this very ground thousands of years ago. She saw the first wolves, saw them standing here, saw them binding their power to the earth in rituals designed to protect it from those who would abuse it, saw them creating safeguards, checks, balances against tyranny. She saw a woman who looked remarkably like her, same silver hair, same golden eyes, standing on this altar with her hands pressed against the stone. The woman was bleeding from dozens of wounds, her body broken from a battle that had clearly been brutal beyond measure. But her expression was fierce, determined, unbroken. "The keepers bind their strength to the land," the woman said, her voice somehow reaching across the centuries to speak directly to Seraphine, "so that no one wolf can claim absolute dominion. We are the balance, the check against tyranny, the ones who ensure that power serves the pack, not the other way around." Blood ran down the woman's arms and onto the altar, soaking into the stone until it glowed with golden light. "When a keeper's blood touches this sacred ground," the woman continued, "when the bond is awakened, the strongest warriors will fall silent and still, until the keeper releases them." The woman's eyes, so similar to Seraphine's own, seemed to look directly at her across the impossible gulf of years. "You carry our legacy now. You hold the power that keeps kings honest, and you must choose whether to bind it again or let it run free." The vision faded as suddenly as it had appeared. The golden light retreated back into the cracks until only faint traces remained. Seraphine staggered backward, the weight of what she had seen crashing over her like a wave. She was not a mistake, not a defect, not the worthless creature everyone had believed her to be. She was a keeper, descended from wolves who had shaped the very foundations of their society. And the weakness everyone had seen in her, the small wolf, the slow healing, the inability to fight, had all been power lying dormant, waiting, preparing for this moment. Her blood on the altar had triggered an ancient binding, had reached out across the kingdom to touch every warrior sworn to serve the Alphaking. And now those warriors lay helpless, their fate resting entirely in her untrained hands. Seraphine's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Aldrich had not moved with surprising speed, catching her elbow and steadying her before she could collapse completely. When she looked up at him, she saw something new in his pale eyes. It might have been respect, or it might have been calculation. She could not tell which, and that uncertainty terrified her more than his earlier threats. The keepers were lost centuries ago, Aldrich said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. The bloodlines died out during the Great Purge, when wolves who feared their power hunted them to extinction. His grip on her arm tightened slightly, not quite painful but firm enough to keep her attention focused on him. If you truly are what the vision claims, if you carry that ancient magic in your veins, then you are the most dangerous creature in this kingdom. He paused, studying her face like he was trying to solve a puzzle with too many missing pieces. And also the most valuable. Before Seraphine could process those words, another messenger arrived. This one was older, a woman with short black hair and warrior marks across her shoulders. She was breathing hard, her face pale with fear. "Sire," she gasped, addressing Aldrich, "the army is completely incapacitated. Every single warrior is down. They're convulsing, bleeding from their eyes and noses. The healers don't know what to do. Nothing they try makes any difference." The woman's gaze found Seraphine, and her expression crumpled into something between desperation and hope. "Some of the weaker wolves have already stopped breathing. If this continues, release them," Barniston, Aldrich commanded, turning back to Seraphine. This time it was not a request or a question. His hand moved to the hilt of a silver blade at his waist, a weapon that could kill even in wolf form. "If you truly are a keeper, if you have the power to bind them, then you have the power to free them." His meaning was crystal clear. "Do it now, or I will assume you are a threat that needs to be eliminated, regardless of what bloodline you claim." Seraphine's mind raced. She had no idea how to use a power she had only just discovered existed. No training, no understanding. The vision had shown her the binding, but had not explained how to release it. Panic rose in her throat like bile. What if she could not figure it out? What if those warriors died because she did not know how to undo what her blood had started? But then her wolf stirred inside her, that ancient consciousness that had woken with the power, and she felt it nudge against her mind. Gently, like it was trying to show her something. Seraphine closed her eyes and reached for that feeling, followed it down into a part of herself she had not known existed, and suddenly she could feel them. Thousands of invisible threads connecting her to every warrior who had sworn themselves to Aldrich's service, binding them to her through blood and magic in ways she could not fully comprehend. The threads were pulled taut, stretched to their breaking point, and she could feel the pain radiating back through them as the warriors fought against the force holding them down. It would be so easy to pull harder, to snap those threads completely and watch Aldrich's army crumble into dust. To punish them all for the years of cruelty and neglect she had endured. The temptation was there, dark and seductive, whispering that this was her chance for revenge. But then Seraphine thought about what the ancient keeper had said, about balance, about ensuring power served the pack, not the other way around. These warriors had not all hurt her. Some of them were probably innocent, probably just doing their duty without ever having met her, without deserving to die for someone else's cruelty. Her wolf growled in agreement, reminding her that keepers existed to maintain balance, not to tip the scales toward vengeance, no matter how justified it might feel. Seraphine took a deep breath and reached for those threads again. But this time, instead of pulling, she tried to loosen them, tried to give the warriors room to breathe while keeping the connection intact. It was harder than she expected, like trying to hold water at precisely the right pressure, not so tight it escaped between her fingers, but not so loose it spilled away completely. Slowly, carefully, she felt the threads begin to relax. 5 miles away in the army camp, warriors gasped and drew in desperate breaths as the crushing weight on their chests suddenly eased. They were still weak, still shaking from the ordeal, but they could breathe again. Could feel their wolves stirring inside them instead of lying dormant and silent. The messenger woman who had brought news of the army's collapse suddenly stood straighter, her own thread loosening enough to let her function normally. The relief on her face was obvious even in the flickering torchlight. Aldrich felt it too. He felt his connection to his warriors return to something approaching normal, and he released the hilt of his blade, took a step back. His expression was still hard, still calculating, but some of the immediate threat had drained from his posture. "You have proven what you are," he announced, his voice carrying across the clearing so everyone could hear. "The Keeper bloodline lives, and it lives in her." He turned to address the assembled wolves, his presence commanding their attention despite the chaos of the last hour. This changes everything, every law, every tradition, every assumption we have held about bloodlines and power. He gestured towards Seraphine, who stood swaying slightly with exhaustion, but refusing to fall. She cannot be treated as an Omega any longer, cannot be dismissed or discarded, because she holds power that predates my throne and supersedes my authority. The words clearly cost him something to say. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard, but he said them anyway because the truth was undeniable. Kale made a sound like a wounded animal. His face contorted with rage and humiliation, and he lurched forward like he might try to attack Seraphine again despite his injuries. But Aldrich's personal guard moved as one, blocking his path with drawn weapons. "Stand down," Aldrich ordered his son, putting the full weight of Alpha Command behind the words. "You have embarrassed yourself enough for one night. You disrupted a sacred ceremony, you attacked a keeper, and you will face consequences for those actions." Kale opened his mouth to protest, to argue, but his father's glare silenced him more effectively than any command could have. "Take him to the healing wards," Aldrich told his guards. "Keep him there until I decide what to do with him." The guards moved to obey, dragging a still protesting Kyle away into the darkness beyond the torchlight. Elder Torvin approached Seraphine cautiously, moving slowly like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any moment. He bowed his head in a gesture of respect she had never seen directed at her before. "Keeper," he said, using the title like it was her name now. "The sacred texts must be consulted. Ancient rituals must be performed. There is much you need to learn about what you are and what you can do." He glanced at Aldrich as if seeking permission, and when the king nodded, Torvin continued, "You will need training, guidance, protection from those who would seek to use your power for their own ends." His eyes were kind, despite the fear that still lingered in them. "The temple can provide these things, if you will accept our help." Seraphine wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, wanted to point out that these same wolves had stood by and watched while she was brutalized, had done nothing while she bled on their sacred altar, had participated in a system that treated her like garbage for 18 years. But she was too tired for anger, too overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the span of a single night, and she found herself nodding simply because she did not know what else to do. Aldrich watched this exchange with eyes that missed nothing. She could practically see him thinking, calculating, planning how to turn this situation to his advantage. He was a king, after all, and kings did not survive 30 years on a throne by failing to adapt to changing circumstances. "The keeper will stay in the royal compound," he announced, making the decision without consulting her. "She will be given quarters befitting her station, protection from my personal guard, access to whatever resources she requires." His pale eyes fixed on Seraphine, cold and assessing. "In return, you will learn to control your power. You will study the ancient texts, and you will serve as advisor to the throne on matters of tradition and law." It was not a request, not even really an offer. It was a polite way of telling her that she was now a political asset too valuable to be allowed to roam free. Seraphine wanted to refuse, wanted to turn and walk away from all of it, from the compound, from the pack, from the weight of expectations she had not asked for and did not understand. But she was naked and exhausted and surrounded by wolves who could kill her if she made the wrong choice. Warriors who feared her, yes, but who also outnumbered her 500 to 1. "I accept," she said, her voice hoarse from screaming and pain and the weight of too many revelations packed into too short a time. The words felt like surrender, even though she knew they were necessary for survival. Aldrich nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Good. The ceremony is postponed until—" He paused, considering. "Until we understand what we're dealing with." He turned to Elder Torvin. "Prepare the blood oath ritual. We bind her tonight." Torvin's eyes widened. "Sire, the texts say such bindings should not be rushed. The keeper must understand what she's agreeing to." "Tonight," Aldrich repeated, his voice hard as stone, "before word of this spreads beyond our borders, before our enemies learn we have a keeper and decide to eliminate the threat." He looked at Seraphine, and for just a moment something almost like sympathy flickered across his face. "You wanted to survive, Keeper. This is how you survive in my world. You bind yourself to me, swear your loyalty, and in return I keep you alive." The unspoken threat hung in the air between them. "Refuse and see how long you last without my protection." Seraphine's wolf snarled inside her chest, furious at the manipulation. But the human part of her, the part that had learned to navigate a cruel world by making impossible choices, understood the game being played. She had power now. More power than she had ever imagined. But power without knowledge was just another way to die. When? She asked quietly. Midnight, Aldrich said. 2 hours from now. Elder Torvin will prepare you. He gestured to a woman who had been standing at the edge of the clearing, tall and elegant, with silver streaking through her dark hair and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She wore deep purple robes that marked her as someone important in the king's household. Maris will show you to your quarters. Get cleaned up. Rest if you can. The woman Maris approached with measured steps, her expression carefully neutral. Come, child, she said softly, and there was something in her voice that Seraphine could not quite identify. Kindness, maybe? Or pity? Or the careful tone one used when handling something both precious and dangerous. Seraphine followed because she had no other choice. As they left the ceremonial circle, she cast one last look back at the altar, at the golden cracks still glowing faintly in the ancient stone, at the blood, hers and not hers, that stained the ground. She had come here tonight as an Omega, powerless, invisible, broken. But what she was leaving as, she did not yet have words for. Behind her, she heard Elder Torvin speaking in hushed, urgent tones to Aldrich. Only fragments carried on the wind, but what she caught made ice form in her veins. The binding goes both ways, sire. The texts are clear. When a keeper swears the blood oath, they are bound to the king, yes, but the king is equally bound to the keeper. Your fates become intertwined, your lives connected. I know, Aldrich's voice, quiet but firm. Do you, Torvin pressed. Because once this is done, you cannot simply kill her if she becomes inconvenient. Her death would be your death. And if she chooses to turn her power against you, she won't, Aldrich interrupted. She's too scared, too new to this. By the time she understands what she's capable of, the binding will have held long enough that she won't risk breaking it. A pause, then, and if you're wrong, another pause, longer this time, then I'll have made a mistake that will end us both. Seraphine's hands clenched into fists. The blood oath worked both ways. Aldrich knew this, was counting on her ignorance to trap her in a binding that would chain her to him just as surely as it would protect her. She should tell him she had heard, should refuse the ritual, should. But what choice did she really have? In 2 hours, she would kneel before Aldrich and swear an oath that would bind their fates together, would trade one kind of servitude for another, would become something between a weapon and a prisoner. All because she had bled on a stone that should have meant nothing. All because she was powerful, and power in this world it was never allowed to remain free. Maris touched her shoulder gently, and Seraphine realized she had stopped walking. Come, the older woman said again. There's still time to prepare, time to understand what you're walking into. Seraphine met her eyes and saw something there that surprised her. Not pity, not fear, hope. You're not the first keeper to face this choice, Maris murmured, so quietly that only Seraphine could hear. But you might be the last one who gets to make it. Before Seraphine could ask what that meant, Maris was already walking toward the royal compound, her purple robes disappearing into the shadows between torches. Seraphine followed. Behind her, the ceremonial grounds slowly emptied as wolves dispersed into the night, whispering about what they had witnessed. About the Omega who was no Omega. About the power that had returned from extinction. About the future that had just become uncertain in ways no one could predict. And 5 miles away, in an army camp where 1,000 warriors were just beginning to recover from a force they could not name, a question echoed through the darkness. What happens now? Seraphine walked toward her fate with that same question burning in her chest. She had 2 hours to find an answer. 2 hours before she would kneel again, this time not as a victim, but as something far more dangerous. A keeper who did not yet know her own strength. A weapon that had not yet chosen its target. A wolf who had tasted freedom for the first time and was about to have it taken away. The moon climbed higher in the sky, cold and indifferent, bearing witness to the night everything changed. And in the royal compound ahead, in a room she had never been allowed to enter, a king prepared to bind himself to the very thing he feared most. All because he could not afford to let her go. All because power recognized power. And Seraphine, broken, awakened, terrified, was about to learn exactly what her blood had bought her. The first chapter of her new life was ending. But the story was only just beginning. Midnight came too quickly. Seraphine stood in borrowed robes, soft gray fabric that whispered against skin still raw from the transformation, and watched the moon through tall windows she had never been allowed to approach before. The royal compound rose around her in stone and shadow, a fortress built to protect kings and crush threats with equal efficiency. 2 hours ago, she had been invisible. Now she was the most watched creature in the kingdom. Maris had left her alone to prepare, but Seraphine could feel eyes on her even through closed doors. Guards posted outside, servants whispering in hallways. The weight of attention like a physical thing pressing against her skin. And underneath it all, faint but growing stronger, she could feel them. The warriors. 1,000 threads connecting her to soldiers she had never met, binding their fates to hers through blood and ancient magic she did not understand. Some of the threads hummed with life, warriors who had recovered from her accidental attack. Others flickered weakly, barely there, clinging to existence by the thinnest margin. She was killing them, slowly, just by existing. The door opened without warning. Elder Torvin entered first, carrying a wooden chest so old the carvings on its surface had worn smooth. Behind him came Maris, her purple robes replaced with ceremonial white. And finally, Aldrich himself, dressed not in the armor of a king, but in simple black that made him look smaller somehow. More human, more dangerous. "It's time," Torvin said quietly. Seraphine's hands trembled. She pressed them flat against her thighs, willing the shaking to stop. She had survived 18 years of abuse, had endured Kyle's blade opening her throat, had transformed into something powerful enough to bring down an army. Surely she could survive this. "I need you to understand what you're agreeing to," Torvin continued, setting the chest down and opening it with reverent care. Inside lay a ceremonial blade, silver and ancient, its edge sharp enough to split air. "The blood oath is not a simple vow. It is a binding that connects two souls at their deepest level." He lifted the blade, turning it so moonlight caught the inscriptions along its length. "When your blood mixes with the king's blood on sacred ground, you will feel what he feels. Know what he knows, share his burdens and his pain. And he will share mine," Seraphine said softly. Torvin's eyes widened slightly. "You heard." "I heard." Aldrich stepped forward, his pale eyes unreadable. "Then you know I'm not asking you to serve. I'm asking you to bind yourself to me in ways that cannot be undone except by death." "You're not asking," Seraphine corrected. "You're demanding. There's a difference." For a moment, something almost like respect flickered across Aldrich's face. "Yes," he admitted. "I am, because I cannot afford to let you exist outside my control. You're too dangerous, too powerful, too—" He paused, searching for words. "Too unknown." "I was nothing this morning," Seraphine whispered. "How did I become a threat by nightfall?" "You were never nothing," Maris said quietly from her position near the door. "You just didn't know it yet." Aldrich moved to the window, looking out over his compound. Over the kingdom he had ruled for 3 decades. "I have enemies, wolves who want my throne, territories that test our borders, internal corruption that eats at us from within." His hands clasped behind his back. "A keeper bound to my service gives me leverage I haven't had since my grandfather's time." "I'm not a weapon," Seraphine said. "No," Aldrich agreed, turning back to face her. "You're something far more valuable. You're a symbol, proof that the old powers still exist. That balance can still be enforced." He crossed the room until he stood directly before her, close enough that she could see silver threading through his black hair, lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. "I'm asking you to trust me," he said quietly. "Not because I've earned it, but because the alternative is worse for both of us." Seraphine looked into those pale eyes and saw the truth of it. Aldrich was afraid, not of her specifically, but of what she represented. Chaos, change, the possibility that everything he had built could crumble if she chose to use her power against him. And she was afraid too, afraid of the threads connecting her to dying warriors, afraid of the power she could not control, afraid of being alone in a world that had just revealed itself to be far stranger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "If I do this," she said slowly, "if I bind myself to you, will you teach me? Help me learn to control this before I accidentally kill everyone connected to me?" "Yes." "Will you protect me from wolves who want me dead?" "With every resource at my command." "And when I've learned control, when I'm no longer a danger to myself and others, will you release me from this binding?" Aldrich's jaw tightened. "The texts say the binding cannot be broken except by death." "The texts also said keepers were extinct," Seraphine countered. "Maybe there are things even the ancient wolves didn't know." A ghost of a smile touched Aldrich's lips. "Maybe." It was not a promise, but it was not a refusal either. Seraphine took a deep breath and nodded. "Then let's do this before I lose my nerve." The ceremonial ground looked different at midnight. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only Torvin, Maris, and a handful of guards who stood at the circle's edge like silent sentinels. The torches had burned low, casting long shadows that stretched across stones, still stained with Seraphine's blood from hours before. The altar waited, patient, hungry. Those golden cracks in its surface still glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched Seraphine's heartbeat. Or perhaps her heartbeat had synchronized to it. She could not tell which. Aldrich stood on one side of the altar, Seraphine on the other. Elder Torvin positioned himself between them, the ceremonial blade held reverently in both hands. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries. Blood to blood, life to life, power to purpose. He held the blade out to Aldrich first. The king took it without hesitation and drew it across his palm in one smooth motion, deep enough that blood welled up immediately, crimson against pale skin. It dripped onto the altar stones, and those golden cracks flared brighter in response. Aldrich's face remained impassive, but Seraphine saw his jaw tighten against the pain. "I offer my blood to bind this oath," Aldrich said, his voice formal and ritualistic. "I accept the Keeper's service. I claim the Keeper's loyalty. I bind the Keeper's power to my throne and my purpose." He extended his bleeding hand towards Seraphine, palm up, waiting. Torvin offered her the blade. Seraphine's hand shook as she took it. The silver was cold against her fingers, the weight of it somehow heavier than it should have been. As if the blade itself understood the magnitude of what she was about to do. She pressed the edge against her own palm, hesitated for just a heartbeat, then drew it across in a line that mirrored Aldrich's wound. The pain was sharp and immediate, but nothing compared to having her throat cut. Nothing compared to the agony of transformation. This was almost cleansing. A small pain that would bind her to something larger than herself. Blood welled up, bright red in the moonlight. "I offer my blood to seal this oath," Seraphine heard herself say, the words rising from somewhere deep inside her. Not memorized, not taught, simply known. "I give my service to the throne. I bind my power to the king's purpose." She paused, then added quietly, "Until death releases us both." She placed her bleeding palm against Aldrich's. The moment their blood touched, the world exploded. Power erupted from the altar in a wave that knocked guards off their feet and sent Torvin stumbling backward. Golden light, so bright Seraphine had to close her eyes against it, surged upward like a pillar connecting earth to sky. And inside her mind, inside the very core of her being, she felt Aldrich. Not just his presence, not just awareness of him. She felt everything. His memories crashed over her like a flood. A young wolf taking his father's throne too early, unprepared and terrified. A wife he had loved dying in childbirth, taking their daughter with her. 30 years of impossible decisions, who to protect and who to sacrifice, which battles to fight and which to flee. The weight of 1,000 lives resting on his shoulders every single day. Loneliness. So much loneliness it threatened to drown her. And beneath it all, buried so deep he probably did not acknowledge it himself. Fear. Fear that he was not enough. That he would fail. That everything he had built would crumble and leave nothing but ashes and regret. Seraphine gasped, trying to pull back, but the bond would not release her, because Aldrich was feeling her too, was seeing her memories with the same overwhelming clarity. 18 years of hunger, of being kicked when she fell, of learning that love was a luxury Omegas did not deserve, of her mother dying to bring her into a world that did not want her, of her father walking into the forest and never returning because even the bond of blood could not overcome his disgust, of nights spent crying where no one could hear, of days spent invisible, of the slow, grinding death of hope under the weight of constant cruelty, of being nothing, choosing to be nothing, because it was safer than being seen. They both gasped as the connection finally stabilized, settling into something sustainable. The golden light retreated back into the altar, leaving only a faint glow in the cracks. But the thread connecting them remained, bright and permanent and impossible to ignore. Seraphine could feel Aldrich's heartbeat as clearly as her own, could sense his emotions, shock giving way to understanding, understanding giving way to something that might have been regret. And he could feel hers, the fear and exhaustion and desperate, fragile hope that maybe this time, maybe with this choice, she had found a way to survive. Their hands were still clasped over the altar, blood mixing and mine, and neither seemed able to let go. "I didn't know," Aldrich said quietly. His voice was rough, shaken in ways she had never heard from a king. "I didn't know it was that bad." You never asked, Seraphine whispered. No, he looked down at their joined hands. At the blood, his and hers, indistinguishable now. I never asked. I never looked. I... He stopped, swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier, but no less affected. I felt her die. My wife. Our daughter. Through a bond not unlike this one. I swore I would never bind myself to anyone again. Never risk that kind of pain. Seraphine felt the truth of it through their connection, felt the scar that loss had left on his soul. But here we are, she said softly. Here we are, Aldrich agreed. He released her hand slowly as if afraid the bond might break if he moved too quickly. But the connection remained, thrumming between them like a living thing. Elder Torvin approached carefully, his expression awed. It is done, the oath is sealed. Keeper and king are bound. Maris stepped forward, producing soft cloth to wrap their bleeding palms. Her hands were gentle, her touch almost maternal as she tended first to Seraphine, then to Aldrich. You should rest, she said to Seraphine. The binding takes a toll. You'll need your strength for what comes next. What comes next? Seraphine asked, though part of her already knew the answer. Training, Aldrich said. Starting at dawn. You have power but no control, and until you learn both, you're as dangerous to yourself as to anyone else. He turned to leave, then paused at the edge of the circle, looked back at her with eyes that held new understanding. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for what happened to you. For all the years no one protected you. I can't undo the past, but... He stopped, searching for words. I'll do better going forward. That's all I can offer. It was not enough, could never be enough to erase 18 years of suffering, but it was more than anyone else had ever given her. Seraphine nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. Aldrich left, his guards falling into formation around him. Elder Torvin followed, murmuring about texts to consult and rituals to prepare. Only Maris remained, standing beside Seraphine in the moonlight. Come, the older woman said gently. I'll show you to your quarters. The royal compound was a maze of corridors and courtyards, all built from the same gray stone that seemed to absorb sound and light equally. Maris led Seraphine through passages lit by torches that cast more shadow than illumination, past rooms whose purposes she could only guess at. Guards stood at regular intervals, all of them watching Seraphine with expressions ranging from fear to curiosity to barely concealed hostility. She kept her eyes forward and tried not to think about how many of them would kill her if given the chance. Here, Maris said finally, stopping before a door carved with symbols Seraphine did not recognize. The older woman pushed it open, revealing a space beyond that made Seraphine's breath catch. The room was larger than the entire dwelling she had shared with 5 other Omegas in the pack's servant quarters. A massive bed dominated one wall, covered in furs and blankets that looked softer than clouds. Tall windows, real glass, not just shutters, let in moonlight that painted everything silver. A fireplace already burned with gentle warmth, and everywhere space, room to move, to breathe, to exist without constantly making herself smaller. These will be your quarters, Maris said, moving through the room to light additional candles. You have a sleeping chamber, a washing room through that door, and a sitting area for receiving visitors should you choose to entertain. She walked to a large wardrobe and pulled it open, revealing more clothing than Seraphine had ever owned in her life. Servants will bring you meals, tend to your needs, ensure you have everything required for your comfort. Maris's tone made it clear that comfort was a professional courtesy, not a personal concern. Seraphine barely heard her. She was staring at the bed, at the windows, at the space. This was not a room for an Omega. This was a room for someone important, someone valuable, someone whose death would be noticed. Why are you being kind to me? Seraphine asked suddenly. Maris paused in her arranging of candles. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned, and in the flickering light, her face looked older, sadder. I had a daughter once, Maris said quietly. She would have been 23 this year. Your age, your coloring. Seraphine's breath caught. Through the bond with Aldrich, she had felt grief for his lost family. But this was different, more personal. What happened to her? She was keeper-blooded, Maris said simply. Not enough to manifest powers, but enough that when the hunters came looking for survivors of the Purge, they took her anyway. Her hands clenched into fists. I was head of Aldrich's household even then. Had resources, connections, but it wasn't enough. She died in a cell alone because she carried blood that terrified small-minded wolves. Tears slid down Maris's cheeks, catching the candlelight. So when I look at you, young, frightened, powerful, I see her. See what she might have become if she had lived. If I had been strong enough to save her. She moved closer, reaching out to touch Seraphine's cheek with surprising gentleness. I couldn't protect her, but I can protect you. Not because it's my duty, because it's my choice. Seraphine felt her own tears start to fall. In 18 years, no one had chosen her. No one had looked at her and decided she was worth protecting. Thank you, she whispered. Maris pulled her into an embrace, the first hug Seraphine could remember receiving. It was brief, but it was real. And when they separated, something had shifted between them. Not just keeper and advisor. Something closer to family. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Maris opened it to reveal a young woman, barely 19, with mousy brown hair and wide, terrified eyes. She carried a tray laden with food, but her hands shook so badly the dishes rattled. I brought dinner, the girl stammered, not quite looking at Seraphine. Lady Maris said the gatekeeper would need to eat. Come in, Lyra, Maris said gently. Set the tray on the table. The girl, Lyra, scurried in like a rabbit entering a wolf's den. She placed the tray down with exaggerated care, then immediately backed toward the door. I'll be your personal attendant, Lyra said in a rush, still not meeting Seraphine's eyes. If you need anything at all, just call and I'll come right away. I promise I won't bother you, otherwise I'll stay out of your way. Lyra, Seraphine interrupted softly. Breathe. The girl sucked in a shaky breath, finally looking up. Her eyes were the color of honey, and they held the same fear Seraphine had lived with her entire life. Recognition sparked. Seraphine had seen this girl before. In the kitchens, always in the corners, always trying to be invisible. And Omega, like Seraphine had been. You're afraid of me, Seraphine said. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. Lyra's face flushed. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be. It's just, you're so powerful and I'm nobody, and I don't want to do anything wrong. And do you eat people in wolf form? Lyra blinked. What? That's what you're wondering, isn't it? Seraphine felt a strange urge to smile despite everything. Whether I'm going to eat you. Maybe, Lyra admitted in a tiny voice. Only on Tuesdays, Seraphine said deadpan. Today's Wednesday. You're safe. For a moment, Lyra just stared. Then unexpectedly, she giggled. A sound quickly smothered behind her hand, but genuine. That's not funny, Lyra said, but she was almost smiling. A little funny, Seraphine countered. Maris watched this exchange with something like approval on her face. Lyra has been assigned to you because she's trustworthy, and because she understands what it means to be underestimated. She moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold. Rest, both of you. Tomorrow begins early, and it will be harder than today. After Maris left, an awkward silence fell. Lyra fidgeted with the hem of her dress. Seraphine stared at the food she was too exhausted to eat. I can go, Lyra offered quietly. Leave you alone. Stay, Seraphine said, surprising herself. Please, I don't want to be alone right now. Lyra's expression softened. She settled into a chair near the fireplace, and Seraphine joined her, bringing the food tray between them. They sat in companionable silence, two Omegas in a world that had never wanted them, trying to figure out how to survive what came next. Outside, the moon climbed higher, cold and watchful. And in the depths of the compound, in rooms Seraphine had not yet seen, forces were already moving. Some to protect her, others to destroy her. The blood oath had been sealed. But the real test was only just beginning. Dawn came too early and found Seraphine in the temple library, surrounded by texts so old they crumbled if handled roughly. Elder Torvin had woken her before sunrise, insisting that training could not wait. The warriors were still weak from her accidental attack, and every hour of delay risked more deaths. Now she sat across from the old wolf, trying to make sense of symbols that swam before her exhausted eyes. Keepers were not merely peacekeepers, Torvin explained, his gnarled finger tracing text written in a language Seraphine barely recognized. They were enforcers, wolves who could bind the power of any alpha who overstepped their authority, who could strip a king of his throne if they deemed him unworthy. He turned to another page, this one showing diagrams of wolves connected by glowing threads. When your blood touches sacred ground, when the binding activates, every warrior sworn to that king falls under your control. You don't just have the power to make them fall. You have the power to command them completely. Seraphine's stomach turned. Command them? Like slaves? Like weapons, Torvin corrected. The ancient keepers could turn a king's own army against him if necessary. It was the ultimate check on tyrannical power. He closed the book with a soft thump. But it's also incredibly dangerous, because absolute power, even power meant to preserve balance, can corrupt absolutely. Seraphine thought about the threads connecting her to 1,000 warriors, about how easily she could have killed them all in that first moment of panic. I don't want to control anyone, she said quietly. I just want to not hurt people accidentally. Then let's start there, Torvin said. He led her to a courtyard where a single warrior waited, a young man barely 20, with nervous eyes and hands that wouldn't stay still. This is Finn, Torvin introduced. He's volunteered to help you practice. Finn managed a shaky salute. Keeper. You don't have to do this, Seraphine said immediately. I nearly killed someone yesterday just trying to... I know, Finn interrupted. I was there, in the camp when it happened. He swallowed hard. It felt like drowning, like something was crushing my chest and I couldn't breathe and my wolf just stopped. His hands trembled, but he met her eyes. But you let go. You could have killed us all, and you chose not to. That's why I'm here, to help you learn control. So next time, if there is a next time, you can do it on purpose. Seraphine felt tears prick her eyes. This stranger, this warrior who had every reason to hate her, was offering trust she had not earned. I'll try not to hurt you, she whispered. I know you will, Finn said simply. Torvin guided her through the process. Close your eyes. Feel for the thread connecting you to Finn. Don't pull, don't push, just touch it gently, like brushing against spider silk. Seraphine reached out with senses she was still learning to use. There, a single golden thread, finer than hair, stretching between her chest and Finn's. She could feel his heartbeat through it, his nervousness, his wolf pacing inside him, wary but willing. Gently, she reminded herself. She touched the thread, barely, the lightest pressure. Finn gasped, staggered. His eyes went wide. Too much, Torvin barked. Pull back! Seraphine yanked her awareness away like she had touched fire. The thread snapped taut, then relaxed. Finn collapsed to his knees, breathing hard. Blood trickled from his nose. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Seraphine started forward, but Torvin held her back. He's all right. Look. Finn was already pushing himself up, wiping the blood away. That was intense, but I'm okay. Let's try again. Are you insane? Seraphine demanded. I just barely touched me, Finn interrupted. Compared to yesterday, that was nothing. He grinned shakily. Come on, Keeper. Again. They tried. Again and again and again. Each time, Seraphine pulled too hard, or pushed too much, or simply could not maintain the delicate balance required. Each time, Finn staggered, but did not fall. Did not give up. By the time the sun reached its peak, Seraphine was shaking with exhaustion, and Finn was pale and bleeding from ears and nose, but neither had quit. Enough, Torvin finally declared. You've both done well. Rest now. Finn saluted and limped away, and Seraphine slumped against the courtyard wall, failure sitting bitter on her tongue. I can't do this, she whispered. I'm going to kill someone, maybe all of them. Torvin settled beside her, old bones creaking. Do you know why I volunteered to train you? Seraphine shook her head. Because I trained your ancestor, the last keeper before the purge. His eyes went distant with memory. She was terrified too, certain she would hurt everyone she touched. It took her months to learn control, months of practice and failure and trying again. He looked at Seraphine with something like fondness. You've had one morning. Give yourself time to learn. Before Seraphine could respond, the courtyard door slammed open. Commander Draven strode in with two of his captains flanking him, and the expression on his scarred face promised violence. Seraphine scrambled to her feet, instinct screaming at her to run. Draven was a wall of muscle and fury, 42 years of battle carved into every line of his body. The scars that crossed his face and neck spoke of fights survived through skill and sheer stubbornness. And his eyes, when they locked onto Seraphine, held nothing but hatred. So this is the abomination, he said, his voice rough as gravel. Torvin stepped between them. Commander Draven, the Keeper is under royal protection. You cannot what? Draven's hand shot out, shoving the elderly wolf aside with casual cruelty. Torvin stumbled, nearly fell. Cannot address the creature that nearly killed 1,000 of my warriors? He advanced on Seraphine, each step deliberate, predatory. Do you know what it felt like? His voice dropped to something quiet and infinitely more dangerous. To feel your wolf simply stop. To lie there, helpless, bleeding, while your body forgot how to breathe. Seraphine backed up until she hit the wall. I didn't mean to. I didn't know. You didn't know, Draven repeated mockingly. He was close now, too close. His hand lashed out, grabbing her throat and lifting her off her feet with terrifying strength. You didn't know. As if ignorance excuses nearly murdering an army. Seraphine clawed at his wrist, but his grip was iron. Black spots danced across her vision. Through the bond, she felt Aldrich's awareness spike, felt him start moving toward her location. But he was too far away, would not arrive in time. My family, Draven continued, his face inches from hers, was slaughtered by a keeper. 25 years ago, during the last days of the Purge. I was 17. Watched my mother, my father, my 3 younger siblings torn apart by a wolf who claimed she was maintaining balance. His grip tightened. Seraphine's lungs screamed for air. She said they deserved it. Said my father had abused his power as Pack Alpha. Maybe he had, but my siblings? His voice cracked. They were children, 6, 8, and 10 years old. What power had they abused? Tears slid down Draven's scarred cheeks. I survived by hiding under their bodies. Spent 3 days there, covered in their blood, until someone found me. And I swore that if I ever found another keeper, I would kill him before they could destroy another family. Seraphine's vision was fading, her struggles growing weaker. But through the haze, she felt something. Not fear, not anger. Understanding, this man was not evil. He was broken, shaped by trauma into something hard and unforgiving, because softness had been beaten out of him by grief. She stopped fighting, let her hands fall, and whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." Draven's eyes widened, his grip loosened slightly, enough for Seraphine to gasp in a desperate breath. "What?" "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice hoarse, "for what happened to your family, for every keeper who used power as an excuse for cruelty, for," she coughed, struggling to speak, "for making you relive that pain." Draven stared at her like she had sprouted a second head. "I won't ask you to forgive me," Seraphine continued. "Won't pretend one apology erases what was done to you. But I swear I never wanted to hurt your warriors. Never wanted power at all." Tears streaked down her own face now. "I'm just trying to survive. Same as you." For a long moment, Draven did not move, did not speak. Then slowly he lowered Seraphine to the ground and released her throat. She collapsed, gasping, hand pressed against bruises already forming. Draven stepped back, his expression unreadable. "You're not like her," he said quietly. "The keeper who killed my family." She felt no remorse, showed no mercy. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. She would never have apologized. The courtyard door crashed open again. Aldrich stormed in with 6 guards, his face dark with fury. "Draven," the king's voice was cold as winter. "Step away from her. Now." Draven did not move, just kept staring at Seraphine. "I said step away, Commander. That is a direct order from your king." Finally, Draven turned, met Aldrich's gaze without flinching. "I have served you for 20 years, sire. Fought your battles. Won your wars. Bled for your kingdom." His jaw tightened. "But if you expect me to bow to a keeper without question, without remembering what her kind did to innocent wolves, then you don't know me as well as you think." "I know," Aldrich said, his voice gentling slightly, "that you lost your family to a monster. I know that pain shaped you into the warrior you are, and I know that fear drives your hatred." He moved closer to Draven, speaking quietly but firmly. "But this keeper is not that monster. She's barely more than a child, terrified, untrained, trying desperately not to hurt people." He gestured to Seraphine, still gasping against the wall. "Look at her, Draven. Really look. Does she seem like a threat to you?" Draven looked, saw Seraphine, small, bruised, trembling, saw the fear in her eyes, the desperate hope that he would not kill her, saw, perhaps, an echo of himself at 17. Broken and terrified and alone. His shoulders sagged. "No," he admitted quietly. "She seems like a victim, pretending to be strong." He looked back at Aldrich. "But victims with power can become monsters. You know this." "I do," Aldrich agreed, "which is why we train her, guide her, give her reasons to choose mercy over vengeance." He extended a hand to Draven. "Help me. Help her. Don't let your past poison her future." For a long moment, Draven stared at that offered hand. Then with visible effort, he grasped it. "I'll watch her," he said. "Not train her. That's Torvin's domain. But I'll watch. And if she proves worthy," he paused, "perhaps I can teach her what warriors need from a keeper, how to strengthen without controlling." "Fair enough," Aldrich said. He released Draven's hand and moved to Seraphine, helping her to her feet with surprising gentleness. Through their bond she felt his concern, his anger at Draven for attacking her, his grudging respect for Draven's honesty. "Can you stand?" he asked quietly. Seraphine nodded, though her legs shook. "Good, because we have a more immediate problem." He turned to face the gathered crowd, Torvin, Draven, the captains, the guards, all watching, all waiting. "Word has reached me from the northern border. Our scouts report unusual activity, massing of forces, wolves we don't recognize, 800 warriors, maybe more." Aldrich's expression went grim. "And with them, creatures. Shadow beasts unlike anything we've seen before. Our scouts say weapons barely slow them down." He looked directly at Seraphine. "We have 3 days, 72 hours before they reach our borders. And you?" His pale eyes held hers. "You need to be ready." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Seraphine, standing in a courtyard surrounded by wolves who feared her, touching bruises on her throat from a warrior who hated her, connected by threads to an army she might accidentally kill, felt the weight of impossible responsibility settle onto shoulders barely strong enough to carry it. Somewhere in the distance, a horn sounded, low and urgent, warning of danger approaching, warning that time was running out. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the compound, Seraphine stood at her window and watched wolves prepare for war. Through the bond, she felt Aldrich in his war room, strategizing with generals, felt his worry, his determination, his fear of losing everything he had built. A soft knock drew her attention. Lyra entered, carrying fresh linens, but instead of leaving immediately, she hesitated. May I ask you something, Keeper?" "Seraphine," she corrected gently. "Just Seraphine." Lyra managed a small smile. "Seraphine, are you scared of the war coming?" Seraphine thought about lying, about projecting strength she did not feel. But Lyra's eyes held the same vulnerability Seraphine saw in her own mirror every day. "Terrified," she admitted. "I can barely control my power with one warrior. How am I supposed to help 1,000 face an army?" Lyra set down the linens and, in a gesture that surprised them both, took Seraphine's hand. "My mother used to say," Lyra whispered, "that the bravest wolves aren't the ones who feel no fear. They're the ones who are scared and choose to stand anyway." Seraphine squeezed her hand. "Your mother was wise." "She was Omega," Lyra said. "Like us. She died when I was 10. But I remember, she always said we were stronger than anyone knew, because we survived what would break Alphas." They stood together at the window, 2 young women looking out at a world preparing for violence they barely understood. And Seraphine felt something shift in her chest, not power, something simpler, more profound, hope. Maybe she was not alone in this. Maybe survival did not have to mean isolation. Maybe, just maybe, she could build something worth protecting. "Thank you, Lyra," she said softly. "For what?" "For reminding me why I need to try." The next 2 days passed in a blur. Seraphine trained from dawn until long past dark. Finn volunteered again, then brought 3 more warriors. Then 10, then 20. Each day her control improved. Each day she learned to touch the threads with more precision, to share strength without overwhelming. Draven watched from the shadows, never interfering, never approving, but watching. On the second day, as Seraphine successfully maintained connections to 15 warriors simultaneously, she saw something shift in his expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but the first crack in his armor of hatred. On the third day, the last day before the Northern Army would arrive, a new warrior entered the training yard. He was different from the others, taller with dark hair and amber eyes that held steadiness instead of fear. A beta, Seraphine realized, balanced between alpha dominance and omega submission. "Captain Asher," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I've been with the Northern Regiments, just returned. Heard we have a keeper who needs practice." He smiled, gentle and entirely unexpected. "I'd like to volunteer, if you'll have me." And when Seraphine took his hand to begin the connection, she felt something she had never felt before. Not just a warrior's thread, but possibility. The kind that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with a future she had never let herself imagine. "Let's begin," she said, her voice steadier than it had been in days, because tomorrow the battle would come. But today she was still learning, still choosing to stand, still becoming someone worth saving. And that, she was beginning to understand, was enough. The War Council convened at dawn, 6 hours after the final warning horn. Seraphine stood in the strategy room while maps covered every surface, marked with symbols that had become grimly familiar over 3 days of preparation. Red for enemy positions, blue for their forces, black for the unknown threat. There was still far too much black. Aldrich stood at the head of the table, looking older than his 53 years. 3 days of sleepless planning had carved new lines into his face. His generals surrounded him, Draven with his scarred visage, Elder Torvin with ancient wisdom, and commanders whose names Seraphine was only beginning to learn. And beside her, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his shoulder, stood Asher. They had spent the previous day training together, hour after hour of Seraphine learning to synchronize her power with his rhythm. And something had happened in those hours, something that went beyond warrior bonds and keeper magic. She had felt safe, seen, valued not for her power but for who she was beneath it. And when their eyes met across the crowded room, his gentle smile reminded her that some things were worth fighting for beyond duty or survival. The northern territories will reach our borders at midday, Aldrich said, his finger tracing the enemy's projected path. 800 confirmed warriors, and with them, he paused, jaw tight, 50 shadow beasts, maybe more. What exactly are these shadow beasts? One of the generals asked. The scouts' reports are inconsistent. Massive, Draven answered, his voice grim. Twice the size of any wolf. Black as pitch with red eyes. They move faster than should be possible and shrug off wounds that would kill normal wolves. A murmur of fear rippled through the room. We need the Keeper to amplify our warriors, another general said. Make them strong enough to face these creatures. All eyes turned to Seraphine. She felt the weight of their expectations like physical pressure. 3 days ago, she could barely touch one thread without causing pain. Yesterday, she had managed 30 warriors simultaneously. But 1,000? Against enemies designed to kill? I can try, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. But I can't promise miracles. I'm still learning. We need more than learning, the general pressed. We need... She said she'll try, Asher interrupted smoothly, his voice calm but carrying an edge that silenced the room. That's all any of us can offer in war, our best effort. He turned to Seraphine, and in his amber eyes she saw not doubt, but faith, and I volunteer to stand with her, to help however I can. Seraphine's throat tightened. This man, this warrior she barely knew, was choosing to trust her when seasoned generals questioned her ability. Thank you, she whispered. Aldrich watched this exchange with calculating eyes. Through their bond, Seraphine felt his assessment, his recognition that Asher's calm presence steadied her in ways command could not. Captain Asher will coordinate with the Keeper, Aldrich decided. His regiment will form her protective guard during battle. He turned back to the maps. Our strategy is simple. We hold the Valley Pass, force them to come through narrow ground where numbers matter less, and we pray to the ancestors that our Keeper can level the odds. And if she can't, a general asked quietly, then we fall back to the compound, Aldrich said flatly. Evacuate civilians. Make our last stand at the walls. The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. That last stand would likely be their final one. One more thing, Aldrich continued, his voice dropping. The northern commander rides at their army's head. Scouts report he carries symbols. Dark magic. Old magic. He looked at Torvin, whose ancient face had gone pale. You think he's a blood sorcerer, the elder said softly. I think he's the one who created those shadow beasts, Aldrich confirmed. And I think he's coming specifically because he learned we have a Keeper. Seraphine's blood went cold. Why would that matter? Because, Maris's voice came from the doorway, where she stood with scrolls clutched against her chest. Shadow beasts are created from captured keepers. The room erupted. Shouts of disbelief, demands for explanation, warriors rising from their seats in shock. But Seraphine could not move, could not breathe, could not process what she had just heard. Maris crossed to the table and unrolled the scrolls she carried, ancient texts filled with diagrams and script that made Seraphine's eyes hurt to look at. 200 years ago, during the Purge, some keepers were not killed, Maris explained, her voice shaking. They were captured, experimented on, tortured until their power twisted into something controllable. She pointed to diagrams showing wolves connected by dark tendrils instead of golden threads. Blood sorcerers learned to corrupt the keeper bond, to transform keepers into shadow beasts, creatures that retain a keeper's strength but have no will of their own. Perfect weapons that cannot disobey. No, Seraphine breathed. Those creatures, those monsters are your kin, Maris confirmed gently. Keepers who were broken and reshaped, enslaved for centuries. The room spun. Seraphine gripped the table's edge to keep from falling. Through the bond, Aldrich felt her horror, her anguish, and beneath it, something else. Rage, or incandescent rage at wolves who would do this, who would torture her ancestors into monsters and parade them as weapons. I have to free them, Seraphine said, her voice like steel. Not fight them, free them. That's impossible, a general protested. How would you even— I purified myself, Seraphine interrupted, looking up with eyes that blazed gold. When Kael cut my throat and my keeper blood touched the altar, it burned away whatever suppressed my power. Corruption can be cleansed. She turned to Torvin. Can't it? The old wolf's eyes widened. In theory, yes. If you could reach the keeper soul beneath the corruption. But the amount of power required. Would it kill me? Torvin hesitated. Possibly. Probably. Attempting to purify one shadow beast might drain you completely. 50 would— I'll do it anyway, Seraphine said simply. You'll die, Draven cut in, his scarred face grim. And then we'll have no keeper and no hope. Then I die trying to save enslaved keepers instead of killing them, Seraphine countered. That's what keepers are supposed to do. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. She looked around the room at warriors who had trained with her, who had learned to trust her. I'm asking you to give me a chance. Hold the line long enough for me to try. And if I fail, she swallowed hard, then you do what you must. Silence fell. Then Asher stepped forward. I'll protect her while she works, he said quietly. My regiment will keep the beasts off her. I'll organize the defensive formations, Draven added, surprising everyone. He looked at Seraphine with something that might have been respect. You get one chance, Keeper. Make it count. One by one, the generals nodded, committed their forces, and Aldrich, through their bond, let Seraphine feel what he could not say aloud. Pride, fear, and desperate, fragile hope. Then it's decided, the king said. We march in 2 hours. The keeper gets her chance. He held Seraphine's gaze across the table. And may the ancestors guide her hand. The march to battle felt like a death procession. 800 warriors in formation, moving through forest paths toward the valley where they would make their stand. Seraphine rode near the center, surrounded by Asher's regiment, 20 warriors who had appointed themselves her guard. Lyra had somehow joined the march, claiming to be a field nurse. The young Omega rode beside Seraphine, terrified, but refusing to be left behind. You shouldn't be here, Seraphine told her quietly. Neither should you, Lyra countered. But here we are anyway. Through the trees ahead, Seraphine could see the valley opening up, a narrow pass between two rocky ridges. Good defensive ground. But she could also see the northern army, a dark mass on the valley's far side, 800 wolves in tight formation. And among them, moving with wrongness that hurt to watch, the shadow beasts, massive shapes that blotted out the sun, red eyes that glowed like coals, smoke or darkness or something worse rising from their forms. Seraphine's keeper's senses screamed at the corruption radiating from them. Can you feel them? Asher asked softly. Yes, Seraphine whispered. Their pain, their terror, they're screaming inside those forms, but nobody can hear them. Her hands clenched into fists. Nobody except me. Aldrich rode to the army's head, his personal guard around him. Through their bond, Seraphine felt him armoring himself emotionally, preparing for death, for failure, for the possibility that today would be his last. Aldrich, she whispered, knowing he would hear through their connection. I won't let you fall. I promise. Through the bond, she felt his gratitude, his fear, his love for a kingdom he had spent 30 years protecting. And I won't let them take you, he answered silently. Whatever happens today, we face it together. The armies stopped, facing each other across 200 yards of empty ground. And from the northern ranks, a figure rode forward. He wore black armor etched with symbols that made Seraphine's skin crawl. His face was hidden beneath a helm, but she could feel the wrongness radiating from him. Blood sorcerer. Torvin had been right. King Aldrich, the sorcerer's voice carried across the valley, amplified by magic. I have come for your keeper. Through the bond, Seraphine felt Aldrich's fury spike. The keeper is under my protection, he called back, and not available for negotiation. I'm not negotiating. The sorcerer gestured, and 5 shadow beasts stalked forward, flanking him like guard dogs. I'm collecting what was stolen from me. I was never yours, Seraphine shouted, surprising herself, surprising everyone. The sorcerer turned his helmeted head toward her. Ah, the little Omega who thinks she's powerful. His laugh was cruel. You have no idea what you are, what you could become with proper training. He gestured to the shadow beast. These were like you once, weak, frightened, useless. I made them strong, I made them worthy, and I will do the same for you. You tortured them, Seraphine countered, rage burning through fear. Broke them, enslaved them. I elevated them, the sorcerer corrected, and you should be grateful I'm offering you the same opportunity instead of simply taking it. Aldrich's hand moved to his sword. You'll have to go through my army to reach her. That, the sorcerer said pleasantly, can be arranged. He raised one armored hand, and the shadow beast charged. The battle began with the sound of thunder. 50 massive forms exploded forward, covering 200 yards in seconds. They hit Aldrich's front line like a battering ram, sending warriors flying. But this time, those warriors did not fall, because Seraphine, standing at the army's center, reached for every thread simultaneously. 1,000 golden connections blazed to life, linking her to every sworn warrior. And through those threads, she poured power. Not controlling them, not commanding, sharing. Strength flowed from keeper to warriors and back again, creating a circuit of energy that amplified both. Warriors who should have been crushed rose up, faster and stronger than they had ever been. The tide that should have broken them held. Aldrich's warriors fought with renewed fury. Swords that should have bounced off Shadow Beast hide now bit deep. Claws that should have failed to pierce corrupted flesh now found purchase. The Shadow Beasts howled, sounds of pain and rage and something that might have been recognition. Because through the threads, Seraphine was not just strengthening warriors. She was reaching for the beasts themselves, touching the keeper souls trapped inside corrupted forms, whispering, I see you, I'm coming. Hold on. But there were so many, and each one fought her touch. The dark magic wrapped around their cores, resisting her keeper power like oil repelling water. Seraphine gritted her teeth and reached deeper, found the golden thread beneath one beast's corruption, and pulled. The beast screamed, convulsed. Black smoke poured from its form as light erupted from within. The corruption shattered. Where a 12-foot monster had stood, a normal gray wolf collapsed, whimpering. One down, 49 to go. Pain exploded through Seraphine's head. Blood trickled from her nose. Sarah! Asher was there, steadying her. You can't purify them all at once. It'll kill you. Have to try, she gasped. She reached for another beast, another thread, another soul screaming to be freed. Pulled, another explosion of light, another purified keeper collapsing in confusion. More blood, this time from her ears. Stop, Asher pleaded. Please, you're dying. But Seraphine could feel them, all of them. Every trapped keeper begging silently for release. How could she stop when they were so close to freedom? She reached for a third beast, and the world tilted. Darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. Her legs gave out. Only Asher's arms kept her from collapsing completely. I can't, she sobbed. There are too many. I'm not strong enough. Through the bond, Aldrich felt her failing, felt the warrior's enhanced strength beginning to waver. The battle was turning. Shadow beasts, no longer held back by amplified warriors, pressed forward. Aldrich's lines began to break. And from the northern ranks, riding forward with deliberate malice, came the blood sorcerer. He had been waiting, watching Seraphine exhaust herself. Now he came to claim what he wanted. Protect the keeper! Draven's voice roared across the battlefield. Defensive formation now! Warriors rallied around Seraphine's position, creating a living wall between her and the approaching sorcerer. But shadow beasts tore through them, and behind those beasts, 800 northern warriors advanced. It was over. Seraphine could feel it. They had tried, failed, and now everyone she cared about would die because she was not strong enough. Then, from the rear of their formation, a commotion, a horse galloping at full speed through the defensive lines, a figure in royal armor, bleeding from a dozen wounds, face twisted with rage and desperation. Kael. He had been confined to the healing wards for 3 days, forbidden from leaving, kept under guard. But somehow he had escaped, had armed himself, had come to the battle anyway, and he was riding directly at Seraphine with murder in his eyes. This is your fault, he screamed. You destroyed my ceremony, stole my throne, took everything from me. His sword was drawn, raised to strike. Asher moved to intercept, but 3 shadow beasts surrounded him, cutting him off from Seraphine. Draven was too far away. Aldrich engaged with the sorcerer. Nobody could reach her in time. Kael's sword descended, and a figure in simple clothing threw himself between them. Finn, the young warrior who had been first to volunteer, who had trusted Seraphine before anyone else. Kael's blade punched through Finn's chest, through his back, through his heart. Finn's eyes went wide, shocked. But he did not cry out. He just looked at Seraphine and smiled. Worth it, he whispered, then collapsed, dead before he hit the ground. No! Seraphine's scream tore from her throat. Grief crashed over her like a wave. Rage followed close behind. This boy, barely 20 years old, had died protecting her, had given his life because he believed in her, and she had failed him. Failed them all. Through the bond, Aldrich felt her anguish, her fury, and something else. Decision. Sarah, don't, he tried to warn through their connection, but she had already made her choice. If purifying one beast at a time was killing her, then she would do them all at once. Either she would save everyone, or she would die trying. And dying trying was better than living with this failure. Seraphine reached for her keeper power. Not gently, not carefully. She grabbed every thread, to warriors, to shadow beasts, to the very earth beneath her feet, and opened herself completely. Power erupted from her like a star exploding. Golden light blazed across the battlefield, so bright that everyone, warrior and sorcerer, beast and wolf, had to shield their eyes or look away. Seraphine felt her life force pouring out through the threads, felt herself burning up from the inside. But she also felt every shadow beast on the battlefield simultaneously. Felt all 47 remaining corrupted keepers. Felt their chains, their pain, their desperate hope. And she pulled. Not on individual threads this time. On all of them at once. On the concept of corruption itself. Come back to me, she commanded the keeper souls. Come home. The dark magic resisted. Fought. Tried to hold its prisoners. But Seraphine was burning herself to ash to break those chains. And ash burned hot enough to destroy anything. With a sound like the world cracking open, the corruption shattered. 47 shadow beasts screamed as their corrupted forms exploded from within. Black smoke vaporized. Red eyes faded to natural colors. Massive frames shrank back to normal wolf size. 47 keepers, scarred, thin, traumatized, but alive, collapsed to the ground, free for the first time in decades or centuries. The Northern Army, seeing their unstoppable weapons reduced to confused wolves, broke. Warriors threw down their weapons, shifted to submission posture, begged for mercy. The blood sorcerer howled in rage, but his magic had no purchase without shadow beasts to power it. Aldrich's warriors, still enhanced by Seraphine's lingering power, overwhelmed him, dragged him from his horse, stripped his armor, revealed a wizened old wolf whose cruelty had kept him alive far past his natural span. Draven's blade ended that life without ceremony or remorse. The battle was won. But Seraphine, she lay on the ground, eyes closed, not breathing. Her skin had gone pale as death. Blood streamed from her nose, her ears, her eyes. She had burned her life force to nothing to save the enslaved keepers. And now she was paying the price. No, Asher breathed, dropping to his knees beside her. No, no, no. He pressed his ear to her chest. Silence. Her heart had stopped. Sarah! Lyra was there too, sobbing, pressing her hands to Seraphine's face. Please, please wake up. But Seraphine was gone. Dead. Aldrich felt it through their bond. Felt the moment their connection went dark. Felt half his soul rip away. He had known this was possible. Had known the oath bound them so deeply that her death might kill him too. But instead of dying, he felt something else. A pull, a demand, an opportunity. The blood oath was still there, still connecting them, just dormant, because it was designed to flow both ways. Aldrich did not hesitate. He shoved his way through the crowd, dropped beside Seraphine's body, and pressed his hands to her chest directly over her heart. What are you doing? Torvin cried. The binding is broken. She's not broken. Aldrich gritted out. Dormant. And if power could flow from keeper to king, it could flow the other way too. Aldrich poured his life force into Seraphine, felt himself aging years and seconds as he gave her his strength, his vitality, his very essence. His black hair went fully silver, lines carved deep into his face, his hands spotted with age. But under his hands, Seraphine's chest moved. Once. Again. Her heart stuttered, caught, beat. Color returned to her cheeks, her eyes fluttered. She was alive, but Aldrich had paid for it with 10 years of his life. Seraphine's eyes opened, confused, golden, alive. You died, Asher sobbed, pulling her into his arms. You died, and he brought you back. Seraphine looked at Aldrich, saw what his sacrifice had cost, felt through their bond, weaker now, but still there, that he had given her part of his life without hesitation. Why? She whispered. Because the oath goes both ways, Aldrich said simply, his voice rougher with age. Because you're worth saving. He smiled, and despite his aged appearance, it was genuine. Because you remind me what it means to lead with mercy instead of fear. Around them, the battlefield was silent. Northern warriors knelt in submission. Shadowkeepers, the 47 freed souls, were being helped by healers, wrapped in blankets, given water. And Aldrich's warriors, seeing their keeper live, began to cheer. A sound that started small but grew, spread, became a roar that shook the valley. They had won, against impossible odds, and the keeper who had saved them all still lived. Seraphine tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. Asher caught her, supported her. Easy, he murmured. You've been through too much. Finn, she choked out. Where? Her eyes found his body, lying where he had fallen. The grief crashed over her again. Fresh, raw. He died protecting me, she whispered. He died believing you were worth protecting, Draven said, appearing beside them. The scarred commander looked down at Finn's body with something like respect. And he was right. Draven knelt, placed his hand over Finn's heart. He served with honor, fell with purpose. We will remember him. One by one, warriors came forward to pay respects, to honor the young soldier who had given everything. And Seraphine, standing with Asher's arm around her waist, keeping her upright, wept for a boy she had barely known, but who had trusted her when nobody else would. Later, after the dead were collected, the wounded tended, the freed keepers cared for, Aldrich called Seraphine to him. They stood apart from the others, king and keeper, bound yet separate. The blood oath, Aldrich said quietly, it saved your life today, but it was never meant to control you. He pulled out the ceremonial blade. I want to break it, properly, completely, set you free. Seraphine stared. But the texts also said keepers were extinct, Aldrich interrupted, echoing her own words back at her. Maybe there are things even the ancient wolves didn't know. He extended the blade to her. Help me try. So they did. Cut their palms again, mixed their blood on blood-soaked earth, and spoke words of severance instead of binding. I release you from this oath, Aldrich said. I release you as well, Seraphine answered. Golden light flared one final time, gentle as sunrise. The thread connecting them stretched, thinned, then broke. Seraphine gasped as the bond disappeared completely. No echo, no residue, just absence. She was alone in her mind, truly alone, and it felt like freedom. Aldrich stood before her, no longer bound, no longer connected, just two wolves who had survived the impossible together. Will you stay? He asked softly. Not as my sworn keeper, but as pack, Seraphine finished. She took his hand, not an oath, in choice. I'll stay. Seraphine stood in the temple courtyard, one hand resting on her swollen belly, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The baby, a girl the healer said, kicked against her palm. Strong, healthy, and when Seraphine touched her keeper senses to the tiny life inside her, she felt the faint glimmer of power already present. Her daughter would be a keeper too, but she would grow up in a world very different from the one Seraphine had known. A world where keepers were valued, not hunted, where 47 freed shadow keepers were learning to live again, teaching their ancient knowledge to a new generation. Where Omegas like Lyra trained as healers and advisors, no longer dismissed as worthless. Where Draven commanded an army that now included warriors from the north, united under a banner of peace instead of conquest. Asher appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, careful of her belly. What are you thinking? He asked softly. That I used to think I was broken, Seraphine said. That weakness defined me. And now? Now I know that everyone is broken in some way. But breaks can heal. Scars fade. And sometimes, she placed her hand over her heart where the blood oath had once bound her. Sometimes the breaking is what lets the light in. Asher kissed her temple. Maris is making dinner, and Lara made honey cakes. Again? Seraphine laughed. That's the third time this week. She's excited about being an aunt. Asher grinned. Let her spoil you. They walked together toward the main hall where Maris had set a long table. Not in the formal dining room, but in the kitchen where Pack gathered his family. Aldrich was already there, looking older but content. Draven sat beside him, the two men who had hated each other once now sharing stories and wine like brothers. Lyra bustled about, fussing over place settings. Torvin dozed in a corner chair, ancient but still teaching keeper history 3 times a week. And around the table, freed shadow keepers mixed with warriors. Northern and southern wolves sharing food and laughter without division. This was pack. This was family. This was what Seraphine had fought for, died for, been reborn for. Come, Maris said, seeing her in the doorway. Sit, daughter. Eat. Rest. Daughter, not keeper, not omega, not weapon, daughter. Seraphine settled into her seat, Asher beside her, surrounded by wolves who had chosen her, who loved her. And for the first time in her 18, nearly 19 years, she felt like she had finally come home. Outside, the moon rose, full and bright. Inside, a pack celebrated life, love, survival. And Seraphine, resting one hand on her belly where a new keeper grew, looked around the table at her family and knew with absolute certainty she was not broken. She was not weak. She was exactly who she was meant to be. A keeper who had brought down an army. A woman who had chosen mercy over vengeance. A mother who would teach her daughter that power meant nothing without kindness. And a wolf who had learned that sometimes the greatest strength was not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together.